For nearly 8 years, Brad Pitt stayed silent, completely and deliberately silent. While headlines tore him apart, while the internet chose sides, while the world filled in its own version of events, Brad refused to defend himself. He let the noise roar without adding a single word to it. Friends called it strength, critics called it guilt, and fans called it mystery. But Brad simply withdrew, disappearing into a space where healing mattered more than public approval. Now, in 2025, after endless legal battles and a family broken in ways he never expected, Brad finally chose to speak. And what he revealed wasn't rage, denial, or retaliation, but the quiet truth of a man who had lived too long in the shadow of a storm. When Brad Pitt first met Angelina Jolie on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2003, neither one could have predicted how drastically their lives would change. At that time, Brad was still married to Jennifer Aniston, while Angelina had recently ended her marriage to Billy Bob Thornton. Their chemistry on screen immediately became impossible to ignore, and the media devoured every look, every interview, and every rumor. By the time Brad and Jennifer finalized their divorce in 2005, a global narrative had already taken root. And when photos surfaced of Brad, Angelina, and her young son Maddox in Kenya, the story exploded into something far bigger than any of them imagined. Over the next decade, Brad and Angelina built a family that fascinated the entire world. They adopted Maddox from Cambodia, Zahara from Ethiopia, and Pax from Vietnam before welcoming their biological children, Shiloh in 2006, and twins Knox and Vivienne in 2008. To the public, their home symbolized unity, diversity, and compassion. The media crowned them Hollywood's model global family, a portrait of beauty and philanthropy. But behind the walls of international homes and red carpet perfection, the pressure grew heavier. Between constant travel, the demands of global stardom, and raising 6 children across continents, cracks were forming long before anyone outside their circle noticed. In 2008, the couple purchased Chateau Miraval, a $28 million French estate that soon became their sanctuary. It was the birthplace of their celebrated Miraval wine and the home where their children played freely, away from cameras. For 6 years, it was their refuge, a place where life felt slower, quieter, almost normal. And in 2014, surrounded only by their children and closest friends, Brad and Angelina exchanged vows in a small ceremony on the property. For a moment, it looked like they had found stability amid chaos, but peace proved fleeting. 2 years later, everything collapsed, and the world watched in disbelief as Hollywood's strongest couple unraveled in public. In September 2016, Angelina filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, a phrase that barely hinted at the turmoil beneath. Days earlier, on a private flight from France to the US, an incident occurred that would shatter their family and dominate global headlines. According to filings submitted later by Angelina's legal team, Brad had been drinking during the flight, and a verbal argument spiraled into something far more explosive. Their eldest son, Maddox, stepped in, and the confrontation escalated. Details remain disputed to this day, but Angelina alleged that Brad grabbed Maddox by the neck. Brad's camp denied this specific claim firmly, yet the allegation alone was enough to trigger federal involvement and a storm from which the family never fully recovered. Because the incident occurred in international airspace, the FBI immediately opened an investigation, and the Los Angeles Department of Child and Family Services began its own inquiry. For weeks, Brad's world revolved around interviews, evaluations, and supervised visits. Every move he made was monitored, every word scrutinized. In the end, both agencies concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. Angelina didn't push the case further, but the damage was irreversible. His public image had been shaken, and the quiet trust inside the family had already begun to splinter. What once seemed unbreakable was now a fractured reality no one knew how to fix. Following the investigations, a temporary court order granted Angelina primary custody of all 6 children, while Brad was allowed visitation under strict supervision. It was a measure designed for safety, but emotionally it marked the beginning of an 8-year battle neither parent expected to endure. What had been a united household was suddenly a collection of separate lives, each shaped by fear, confusion, and resentment. The media pounced on every leaked detail, twisting the family's pain into entertainment. Through it all, Brad retreated further into silence. He later admitted that 2016 became his wake-up call, the year he stopped drinking and confronted the emotional fallout of that day on the plane. The greatest pain did not come from lawyers, investigations, or headlines. It came from the widening distance between Brad and the children he adored. Maddox, who had once been the spark that made Brad a father, was the first to turn away. By 2021, he reportedly testified in court in a way described as not favorable to Brad. Multiple reports suggested he no longer considered Brad his father and had explored dropping Pitt from his name altogether. Pax followed a similar path, expressing anger in a private Instagram post in 2020 where he called Brad an awful person. Although the post was deleted quickly, screenshots spread online, offering a glimpse into the deep emotional wounds within the family. Shiloh, once seen as the bridge between Brad and Angelina, made a heartbreaking decision in 2024. She filed to remove Pitt from her name and legally adopted the name Shiloh Jolie, a request the court approved that same year. For many, it was the clearest indication of where her loyalty now rested. Vivienne, still working closely with her mother on Broadway's The Outsiders, began using Vivienne Jolie professionally. Knox remained shielded as a minor, but even he hadn't been seen with Brad publicly for years. Though he rarely addressed any of it, sources close to Brad confirmed he repeatedly requested therapy sessions with the children. Some sessions happened, but none lasted long enough to repair the growing emotional divide. As the emotional distance intensified, the legal battles grew more complicated. Shadehow Muravel, their once beloved home, became the center of a vicious financial dispute. Originally, Brad held 60% of the property through his company Mondo Bongo, while Angelina held 40%, until he transferred another 10% to her so they could share ownership evenly. For years, Muravel symbolized family, unity, and shared dreams. But after the divorce, it transformed into a battleground worth $500 million. In 2021, Angelina sold her entire stake to Tenute Del Mondo, owned by Russian billionaire Yuri Shefler, without Brad's written consent. Brad's legal team claimed they had a verbal agreement requiring mutual approval before any sale. To Brad, the sale felt hostile. To Angelina, it felt necessary. Angelina countered Brad's lawsuit immediately. She claimed he refused to buy her share unless she signed a broad non-disclosure agreement, something she believed was designed to silence her about the events leading to their divorce. To her, the NDA was not a business formality. It was an attempt to control the narrative. Brad's camp denied this interpretation, saying the NDA was standard for protecting the winery's business operations. The disagreement only deepened the tension between them. What started as a dispute over a vineyard evolved into a symbol of everything unresolved between two people who once promised forever. By late 2023, the conflict surrounding Muravel became even more tangled. Angelina argued that Brad's $35 million lawsuit forced her to produce burdensome documents, and she accused him of weaponizing the legal system. Brad's team pushed back, saying Angelina was hiding key documents behind attorney-client privilege and using legal technicalities to protect information that could shift the case in his favor. Angelina responded by reminding the court that she had left Brad control of both Muravel and their Lowe's Angels homes after their separation. Hopping the distance would reduce conflict. Instead, the years that followed only sharpened the edges of their disagreements. By 2024, Muravel had transformed into a labyrinth of international legal filings, Luxembourg corporate laws, and accusations from both sides. Each party insisted the other was acting in bad faith. Court records referenced more than 20 disputed documents, claims of secret negotiations, and conflicting interpretations of business agreements. As the December 17 hearing approached, the winery no longer resembled the peaceful estate where their children once ran barefoot through lavender fields. It had become a monument to resentment, loss, and a marriage that had collapsed under the weight of too many wounds. Then, in May 2025, Brad did something he had avoided for nearly a decade. He finally broke his silence. Appearing on the cover of GQ, he gave his first full interview since Angelina filed for divorce in 2016. For years, the world had only heard him through legal statements and photographs taken from afar. But in this interview, Brad spoke with a calmness that surprised many. He confirmed that the marriage had been formally dissolved in December 2024, quietly nodding that it was simply something that needed to happen. There was no drama in his tone, just acceptance, like a man who had finally stopped running from the past. When asked why he never defended himself publicly, Brad answered with a simplicity that carried the weight of 8 painful years. "I didn't see the point in speaking when everything was chaos," he said. "Silence was the only way not to make things worse." For the first time, he acknowledged his distance from his children. He did not blame them, did not challenge their words, and did not try to rewrite the narrative. "I'm always here if they need their father," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology, nor was it a protest. It sounded more like a truth he had learned to live with. He avoided all mention of the plane incident, avoided pointing fingers, avoided saying anything that could reignite the fire. Instead, he accepted the reality that the past could not be undone. "What happened happened," he told the interviewer, one sentence that held both pain and resignation. Brad also shared that he had been sober since 2016, explaining that rebuilding himself required confronting uncomfortable truths. Meditation, art, and solitude had become a central part of his life. He spoke like someone who had turned inward long enough to understand that healing did not require an audience. Following the interview, a source close to Angelina told People magazine that she felt relieved Brad had finally acknowledged the divorce was over. She had no intention of responding publicly. As the story spread, public reaction was mixed. Some admired Brad for choosing humility and restraint. Others felt he still hadn't taken full responsibility. But to Brad, the interview was not about winning support. It was about reclaiming his voice after years of being defined by silence. It felt less like a comeback, and more like the closing page of a book that had taken too long to finish. In the years after the separation, Brad's professional life remained strong even as his personal life quietly unraveled. Plan B, the production company he co-founded, continued releasing critically acclaimed films like 12 Years a Slave, Moonlight, The Big Short, and Women Talking. Even without speaking publicly, his influence shaped some of the most powerful stories in modern cinema. Hollywood insiders agreed that Brad's creative instincts remained sharp, even during the most turbulent years of his life. Behind the scenes, he poured himself into work, not out of escape, but out of a desire to stay grounded in something he could still control. By late 2025, Brad prepared to return to acting with a much-anticipated Formula One film produced by Apple Studios. Created with the involvement of Lewis Hamilton, the movie was described as Brad's boldest attempt to reinvent himself since Ad Astra. Fans saw it as a sign that he was ready to step back into the spotlight on his own terms. Industry insiders suggested the film could mark a new era for him, one defined not by scandal, but by a renewed sense of purpose. Even so, Brad's personal life remained far quieter than in the years when he was half of Hollywood's most famous couple. Outside of work, Brad adopted a lifestyle far removed from red carpets and flashing cameras. He now spent most of his time at his Santa Barbara estate, where he sculpted in a private studio, tended to gardens, and lived with a sense of intentional privacy. Friends described him as peaceful but changed, a man who had learned the cost of fame and chosen to step away from its loudest corners. The energy he once poured into global travel and high-profile events had shifted toward stillness, reflection, and creative healing. Reports surfaced in early 2025 that Brad was engaged to Swiss jewelry designer Inez de Ramon. The two were first photographed together in 2022, and as their relationship grew, Brad reportedly let his guard down for the first time since the divorce. Multiple sources confirmed he had proposed, with a small, private European ceremony planned for the end of the year. Although Brad did not publicly address the engagement, those close to him said Inez brought a sense of calm and comfort he had long been missing. After years of turmoil, he was finally allowing someone new into his heart. Meanwhile, Angelina Jolie continued to build her own path, directing, producing, and working on humanitarian missions across the globe. She remained focused on the children's well-being, keeping them close, keeping their world steady. Her daughter Vivienne began working alongside her on the Broadway production of The Outsiders, marking a new chapter for the family. Angelina openly said that neither she nor the children had returned to Muraville since the painful events surrounding the divorce. For her, leaving that place behind was part of protecting their emotional safety. Maddox now lived in South Korea, pursuing his own studies and life away from the spotlight. Pax kept a low profile, avoiding public appearances, while Shiloh and Vivienne had already dropped the Pitt surname. Knox, still young, lived quietly under Angelina's protective care. For Brad, these were not just facts. They were reminders of a space between him and his children that no interview, no court ruling, and no apology could instantly fix. He carried that distance like a quiet ache, a reminder of wounds still healing. After 8 years of choosing silence, Brad finally spoke. But speaking didn't erase the pain, nor did it magically rebuild the relationships time had strained. The legal battles were nearing their end, but the emotional ones remained delicate and unresolved. The world could interpret the interview however it wanted, but only Brad and his children knew the full story, each holding their own truths, each shaped by their own memories. Healing, in this case, would require more time than any court or article could provide. And so, where does this leave the story now? Brad Pitt has found a new chapter, quiet, creative, and grounded. Angelina continues raising their children with strength and purpose. The wounds exist, but the future remains unwritten. And the question that lingers in every mind is simple but profound. Can a family this fractured ever find a way forward? Time may be the only one capable of answering that. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional, real-life stories just like this one. Thank you for watching.